Yukio Mishima, born Kimite Hiroka in Tokyo on January 14, 1925, spent his earliest years in a nursery presided over by his aristocratic grandmother, where portraits of past emperors and tales of samurai valor formed the decor, as well as the child's imaginative horizon. Those walls established two obsessions: imperial mystique and martial beauty, that never left him. When Mishima returned to his parents' house and distinguished himself as a prodigious student at the Gakushuin and later at the University of Tokyo, his mind was already divided between word and sword, between the introspective labor of literature and the outward gesture of heroic action. That duality would become the axle on which his entire intellectual and physical life turned. The capitulation of Japan on August 15, 1945, carved a wound in Mishima deeper than the civic humiliation most felt. Listening to Emperor Hirohito renounce his divinity on the radio, the 20-year-old sensed that a cosmic thread had snapped. Millions had died for a god who now declared himself mortal, and the spiritual grammar of the nation seemed to dissolve overnight. Rather than abandon the imperial idea, Mishima transformed it. He treated the emperor not as an actual sovereign wielding political power, but as what he later called an absolute principle of beauty, a radiant aesthetic axis around which Japanese identity might still revolve. His monarchism was therefore modernist, grounded less in ritual orthodoxy than in a longing to rescue transcendence from the wreckage of war and occupation. The rescue mission moved first through language. Mishima's post-war fiction, stories like Patriotism and early novels such as Confessions of Mask, examined how erotic desire, self-sacrifice, and national myth were entangled. Yet by the early 1960s, he had come to distrust writing alone. Words, he argued his 1968 memoir manifesto Sun and Steel, were disembodied signs that could no longer incarnate value. Only a trained and beautiful body could accomplish that. Mishima plunged into weight training, kendo, and classical fencing, sculpting his torso into what he believed a modern samurai should be. The literary genius remade himself as an intellectual athlete, insisting that muscle and metaphor must converge if Japan were to recover its spiritual nerve. That convergence crystallized institutionally in the Tatenokai, the shield society he founded in 1968. Composed mainly of university students, the group drilled with the ground self-defense force, marched in impeccable olive uniforms, and swore to protect the imperial institution should the Constitution ever come under radical assault. Outsiders dismissed the Tatenokai as eccentric pageantry, but Mishima viewed it as a practical embodiment of his aesthetic politics. A living sculpture meant to shame the student left by reviving the poise, courtesy, and martial discipline of Meiji-era cadets. Each parade and press conference was choreographed to project a vision of patriotic elegance, equal parts antique and avant-garde. Mishima's major fiction of the period elaborated the same vision. The Sea of Fertility tetralogy, begun with Spring Snow, 1969, and concluded on the very morning of his death with The Decay of the Angel, dramatizes successive incarnations of a restless soul as it drifts through courtly romance, right-wing terrorism, war, and post-war ennui. The Emperor scarcely appears, yet his gravitational pull shapes every destiny, whether in the suicidal fervor of runaway horses or the metaphysical melancholy of the Temple of Dawn. Mishima was mapping an entire century through the tremors the imperial image sent through individual lives, suggesting that sovereignty, even in eclipse, remained the secret architect of Japanese consciousness. All these threads tightened toward a single hour on November 25th, 1970. Mishima and 4 loyal cadets entered the Ichigaya headquarters of the Eastern Army, seized the commanding general, and demanded permission to address the troops arrayed below. Standing on a balcony with a hachimaki inscribed, "Would that I had 7 lives to give for my country," the novelist harangued the soldiers to rise against the Constitution's pacifist Article 9 and restore the honored place of the emperor. The speech was met with jeers and indifference. Mishima stepped back inside, knelt on a white cloth, performed seppuku, and was beheaded by a second. Every detail had been rehearsed. The cut of the uniform, the wording of the manifesto, the exact timing so that the final novel would be delivered to his publisher minutes before blood darkened the floor. Reactions in the years since divide along almost the same lines Mishima spent his life crossing. Nationalists claim him as a martyr for constitutional revision. Progressives label him a fascist aesthete. Queer theorists examine the homoerotic charge that fuses his male bodies, steel blades, and imperial icons. Recent scholarship complicates all these readings by stressing that Mishima's emperor was never simply a reactionary fetish, but an empty center on which he projected the contradictions of modern identity. The Grand Centenary commemorations in January 2025, featuring academic debates, theatrical revivals, and competing floral tributes for nationalist and literary societies, show that Mishima remains a mirror in which Japan negotiates its own unresolved history. To read Mishima, then, is to confront a paradox that has not lost its sting. How can a post-imperial society continue to feel the seduction of the imperial sublime? Mishima refused to answer with theoretical abstraction. He answered with a lifelong experiment in unity, uniting word and flesh, eros and discipline, individual longing and public myth, culminating in a gesture that was at once political coup, aesthetic performance, and personal consummation. Whether judged beautiful or monstrous, that gesture insists that a civilization cannot live by economics alone, that the desire for transcendence persists, and that symbols potent enough to inspire sacrifice do not die merely because constitutions deny them. Yukio Mishima lived and died on the wager that modern Japan could be re-enchanted if the sword once again acknowledged the sun, and if the sun, in turn, reignited the imagination of a people tempted to forget the cost of their own history.